Welcome back to the channel. Ethan Skolnick is here with me, my guy who covers the Miami Heat, and their season just ended. We're going to talk about that. You got to figure out about 5 months of off-season content now, which you're not used to because this team's been going to the finals.
This is what should have happened last year. Actually, I got a 1 year stay of execution on this. I thought we were ending on around May 1st, 2023, and it ended up going until the end of June. This time, not so fortunate, and honestly, not so unexpected. So,
Yeah.
kind of what we thought was going to happen this year.
I had texted Greg Sylvander, who I had up here last week or so, or the week before, to preview the Celtics series, and basically, that was even before the play-in, so we didn't know it was going to be a Celtics series. We just kind of expected it would be a Celtics series. And one of the things we talked about was basically like you kind of saw this ending coming, and to me, this was like of the Jimmy era, my least favorite Heat team to watch during the regular season, even more so than last year for whatever reason.
Wouldn't say it was my least favorite, only because you at least had a couple of new elements to it that could be long-term Heat players. We'll see.
Sure, yeah,
But I think that Jaquez, particularly in the first half of the season, and Jovic in the second half of the season, at least gave you some possibility that the organization has some growth potential here. And again, what direction they decide to go is what probably the next 2 months are going to be devoted to on five on the floor. But uh, and then adding Rozier, even though we didn't really get to see it to fulfill the expectations because he wasn't available in the playoffs. There were some new elements this year that made it a little bit different. But what was frustrating to me about this year was that it was two guys in, two guys out the whole year. It's tough because we just saw what they look like without Jimmy Butler, and it was dreadful. But a lot of this to me still comes back to Jimmy Butler. Like in the modern NBA, you are where your stars take you. I don't think they can have another regular season where he plays under 60 games and plays like 10 to 15 of them at a high level. There just were not enough games this year where you came out of it saying, okay, Jimmy Butler was the best player on the floor. And I'm talking about against the good teams because they were 0-10 against the top five teams in the West. They were 0-3 against the Celtics. They had one win against the Knicks, one win, I believe, against the Bucks. And
yeah.
I understand everybody's like, okay, he's going to ramp up for the playoffs. But the problem was that they were in a position where they had to play extra games, and he got hurt in one of those extra games. So it could have happened at any time. But all the conversations we're going to have about this offseason and whether they trade Hero and whether they're willing to part with Jaquez or Jovic and how many picks and whether Rozier's here for the future. To me, it starts with what Jimmy Butler are they expecting for the next year or two? What
Yeah.
extension are they providing? And what build timeline are they on? Are they on his still? Or are they on Bam's? And I hate to say it, but I kind of feel like they missed the window on Jimmy's timeline, and that would have been at the very least last summer. And I don't blame them for it entirely because of Joe Cronin, but that was the offseason that they had to do something of significance to keep it going with him, and they didn't. And so they made kind of the hedge move with Rozier during the season, which I liked and I still would endorse. But ultimately he wasn't there and Jimmy wasn't there at the end, so none of it mattered. And they can't be in a position where they're a 7 or 8, 6 seed
Yeah.
in that kind of spot and have to crawl out of it every year. That's not sustainable in any way.
I've been of the mindset that you can surround Jimmy and Bam with role players, high level role players, and get this done. But now that it looks like we're at the start of a Jimmy decline from
Mm.
being like super Jimmy to being just a really good, probably still all-star level aging player, like aging star. I almost feel like you kind of need the third star now. Do you
Yeah.
feel like, and I want you to also touch on this historically, like Pat Riley and the Heat, when builds run their course, like they know and they act on it. So using that context based on historical precedent, what do you feel like they can do or will do rather, if you had to guess, even though it's still very early, but we know what the results are, and what do you feel like they're going to do ultimately?
Well, I know what they probably would do if the opportunity arises is they would move the third guy. And that's, they always talk about how teams always ask for the third player. But it's one thing for teams to ask for it or for you to shop the third player. And I don't think they've shopped the third player. I think
At
they
all.
have.
Really?
No, I don't think they've shopped him. I think
Okay.
they've listened. I don't think they've shopped him, and
And
those
this
are
is
two
Tyler
different
Herro for
things.
people who,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
this is
and
Tyler
I
Herro we're
think
talking
you go back historically all the way, and one of the things with the Heat that's beneficial because of their continuity is it's a lot of the same people, so you kind of get a line on what they're thinking. Like Jamal Mashburn was the third guy in the Zoe Tim build. And Jamal was a pretty good regular season player. He struggled some in the playoffs until he was traded for Miami and then destroyed Miami in a first round series. But he didn't totally fit personality wise with the top two guys, particularly with Tim. And when he passed on that shot to Weatherspoon at the end of that series against the Knicks, it wasn't just because of that, but for a lot of reasons, they knew, and I've talked to front office people about this, that the team had to be different the next year. And so, if you look at what they did, they went after, they had cap space in 2000, which they don't have now. And the league was different because it was a cap space league now. Now it's a get a guy a year before his contract expires league. That has changed. Pat has reflected upon that and discussed that over the past few years. He talked about that before they got Jimmy, that you have to get a guy a year before he's a free agent or 2 years before he's a free agent now. But at that point, they did have cap space, and so they made a run at McGrady and Grant Hill. Pat met with them up in Orlando, but they both signed with Orlando. It turned out with the Grant Hill case, it was a good thing because ultimately Grant was compromised because he played through an ankle injury against the Heat and he was never quite the same player. But then they went after Eddie, and he was kind of their third choice, but they got him and they got, they traded PJ, they traded Mash, they got him, they got Grant, they got Mason, but then Zoe got sick. So we never got to really see what that team would have looked like. And then they kind of had the same situation with Eddie, who had stuck around for the next build because of the length of his contract. He signed a 7-year contract with the Heat. He was on a 7-year, $86 million deal. Seemed like a lot at the time. Okay. Now it's a mid-level guy, basically. But they signed him to be essentially a complimentary scorer. Um, and then the next build with Dwayne, he was kind of the veteran scorer, and he stayed along with Shaq. And then he failed in the playoffs. He pulled a mash. It wasn't surprising because it was kind of Eddie's reputation. But they needed him in that series when Dwayne pulled his ribcage muscle and he went 1 for 9 in Game 6 up in Detroit. And that's why when they came back and played Detroit in Game 7, there was an over reliance on Dwayne to try to work on to try to get them through it, and he wasn't capable of it because he wasn't healthy, and Shaq was pissed and all that. So what did they do? They traded Eddie. But at that time they went and got pieces. They traded Eddie, but it was part of a bigger plan. And they brought in Walker, they brought in Posey, they brought in Jay Will, and they brought in Gary Payton. Greg has been of the mindset that that's the kind of move that they would try to make. The thing is with Tyler is that this idea of trading him to get us with pieces to get a star. I think that ship, if it ever was in the dock, has sailed. I don't see that happening. I think that at this point, if you're moving Tyler, you're moving him to get better fits. And I think that means moving off of him to get front court help for Bam. That's where I would look, and maybe someone has one fewer year on his contract to give them a little bit more flexibility. So I think that's more the direction that they go now, and I don't think that's a direction. And I may be wrong; it may have changed over the past few months, but I don't think that's a direction they were planning on going or had been going before. So that's where I feel it is. But Brian, ultimately, this comes down to one thing. Okay, what is the build? I mean, is it because if you're going all in on Jimmy, all right, and you're going to gut the future to do it, like get a Mitchell, get a Durant, okay, something along those lines. I mean, if you're going to do that, then okay, you're doing it because you believe Jimmy can help you get over the finish line. Like this idea that go get a guy to just be an innings eater so that Jimmy doesn't have to do much. I'm not with. Like you're not going to get somebody so that Jimmy can do less. You're going to get somebody because you think Jimmy can still do it with someone other than Bam offensively to finish the job. If you don't believe that, you can't extend him for 2 years at $110 million or whatever it is eat into your cap and have a guy who's going to play 45 games and is going to care about 10 of them. To me, that's not the move. If that's the direction they're going, I'd rather they just go young. If they're going to do that, then give Jimmy a chance to win somewhere else. Trade him, build around Bam, keep Jaquez, keep Jovic, keep the 15th pick, okay, and maybe try to get someone else again on Bam's timeline, not necessarily a star, but kind of homegrown this thing that way.
One, would they actually trade Jimmy Butler? And two, would an extension sort of signal like, yes, this is all in, this is the last
Yes,
stage of the Jimmy bill?
I think if they extend him for 2 years, yes, I don't think they're going to do that. That's just my hunch. It's not on information. I don't. I think they might give him 1 year. But I would be surprised if it's 2 years. I mean,
But you don't
look,
think they trade him?
I don't think they're looking to trade him, but I do think they're going to be open to anything but trading Bam. So is that fair to say that?
Mm.
I don't see them trading Bam. I just don't. He's the culture carrier at this point. He's 27 years old. I don't know how much more offensive growth is really there. I think that's a little bit of hope trafficking. There's certain things it just seems like, whether it's in the post or whatever, that he's not going to get to that level. But we've seen improvements in other areas. With him, it's always mindset as much as it is skill set. And I don't know if he's ever going to be that kind of killer number one offensively, but I know that the bottom drops out when he's not in there defensively. Like that, I know. And I saw a tweet, there's a lot of tweets out there, but there's a couple that actually make some sense. Somebody tweeted that I follow on the Heat Twitter space about a week ago that Bam sets their floor. So, like, Bam sets their floor, Jimmy
Yeah.
raises their ceiling.
Yeah.
That if you don't have Bam, like the whole thing falls apart. But you need a ceiling raiser for the organization, for the squad, and that has been Jimmy. And I guess what people are saying is, okay, now it needs to be somebody with Jimmy doing that. Again, I'm okay with that line of thinking, but not if it's okay. That we're not expecting Jimmy to help raise your ceiling anymore either, but we're going to pay him $50+ million a year. No, like it's not that. And my concern with Jimmy, and there's a few things. First thing, it's complicated optics wise to trade him. He raised this organization back from the dead after the Whiteside era, and he overachieved, okay, in terms of what he was given to work with, and he's overachieved for his tenure. So if you're going to trade him, it becomes another situation where there's going to be a perception that you don't take care of your stars. And that's a perception they've tried to walk away from since what happened in 2015 and 16 with Dwayne. You obviously don't want to relive all that stuff. So I understand that. I get it. But ultimately, you also can't be in a Kobe at the end of his career Lakers situation. They were in tune with that when they were doing the Dwayne deals. So I don't think they want to go that direction either. So they're going to have to find some kind of a middle ground again with Jimmy, I think, on contract length and also on performance and availability expectations.
The thing that I'm interested in is how aggressive they're going to be this offseason, because I do remind people, and I have reminded people, last time they lost in the first round, they went out and got who was the best free agent available in Kyle Lowry. They can't do that this year necessarily, but they got Kyle Lowry, who at the time, and people may say, oh, the deal didn't work out. It worked the first year, it was fine. And there was a bidding war. Like, there were other teams
Right.
interested in Kyle Lowry around the league, and the Heat had to, tack on a third year to sort of get him. And they also got PJ Tucker, who's been one of their best role player signings that they've had for a long time. They were the 1 seed. I thought could have won an NBA title against the Warriors that year if they got to the finals. They were a shot away. Like, they were really close. And that was after they got embarrassed by the Milwaukee Bucks, worse than this, in round 1 of that series in the 2021 playoffs. And then I look at Pat Riley, who he hates losing to Boston. He's going to be 80 next year.
Right.
And I wonder, like, okay, is this finally the time where Pat's like, all right, enough's enough. Like, we've been playing it both ways, so to speak, like trying to, have 2 different builds on one team and it's not working. Like, he's going to get, for one last time, perhaps, into like old Pat mode and really actually cutthroat Pat, because now that they're staring into the abyss, as he said.
I thought we'd see Cutthroat Pat last offseason. So I don't know if Cutthroat Pat is like the Tooth Fairy at this point. I don't know if that's a figment of my imagination from the past. He's gotten more sentimental as he's aged, which is actually a pleasant thing if you've been around him. But I do think that it's changed the tone of this a little bit. You came off the LeBron thing. He thought he put together a generational team. I know how raw and angry he was when LeBron left. I did kind of the quintessential interview with him about that posted on Bleacher Report, where I sat in his office and I was told basically, no LeBron questions, and then Pat talked to me on the record about LeBron for 45 minutes. So I know that he wants to have one last run. All right, and I think the Jimmy thing was perfect because Jimmy, as much as the organization battles with him about certain things, and he's probably the most difficult star they've ever had, he does on the court embody what they're about when he's there. And so I think Pat sees himself in Jimmy in a lot of ways because Pat sees himself as Schenectady Pat still, not as Showtime Pat. And that's one of the reasons he has tried to get away from all that stuff. And when Winning Time was airing, he wasn't interested in any of it. He views himself as, the guy from Schenectady in the pool hall, basically. And so he's a hustler like Jimmy. And I think that he desperately wants to win this with Jimmy. And so if you're asking me, Cutthroat Pat, I'm torn because in one case I say, okay, he would do anything to win now at almost 80 years old, but I think he wants to win with Jimmy. Um, and I don't know that everybody in the organization feels that way, honestly. I think there's a lot in the people in the organization that are kind of tired of Jimmy's antics and having to deal with it on a day to day. But ultimately, if the boss, and he is the boss, he doesn't sign the checks, but he's the one who makes the final decisions here on a lot of stuff. If he and they defer to him still to do it. If he wants to win one with Jimmy, then I think anybody else is on the table but Bam. I think Bam is here, and I think Tyler is moved for other parts. And I think they try to come to training camp. Probably Rozier is back, and they try to shape it as, okay, we got Terry to help. We've got other pieces, more complementary pieces. The roster fits better, and we're going to make a run with this group. I think they're going to blend it again. And I've said that I would go either all in or all young, but I think they're actually going to split the difference and go down the middle. I mean, one of the problems is we look at these things, Brian, as static.
Yeah.
Well, you have Jimmy. We're just talking about it in the Heat context. But in the meantime, other teams in the NBA have gotten better, right? Like we weren't talking about OKC. We were talking about them theoretically 2 years ago and all their draft picks. Now they're like reality, and they have the potential to get even better. Denver knows what it is to win a championship now. They're not going anywhere. Minnesota has figured this thing out to a certain degree, and they have the next Wade. So I'm just saying, and you look at some of these, so you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like we're all out, and Boston's gonna be there. Okay. Nobody else in the East worries me at all. But
The
like
Knicks too. The Knicks
and then
have
the
no
Knicks too.
max contracts.
The
Like
Knicks, right. The Knicks, right, exactly. So I think that you look at it, you're like, okay, well, yeah, you had Jimmy and you had but you have an aging Jimmy, and you have all these other teams that have young stars. I mean, SGA is going to be in the next round, right? Edwards is in the next round. These guys are there. I mean, the guys in Orlando are starting to develop. I mean, this is not. It's not just like, okay, year after year after year. No, you get older, others get better. This gets harder.
ultimately, I do feel like they're actually in a better spot going into this offseason than they were last offseason.
They are.
Given that they have some young pieces, they have movable contracts, salary slots in Terry Rozier and Tyler Herro. They could move one of them. Duncan Robinson still, like they have more things they can do, I feel like, and then the draft pick flexibility is still there to some degree. So, and they have a good first round pick because they weren't very good in the regular season.
Right. In a bad draft, though. But yes,
In a bad draft, yes.
if anybody's going to find somebody at 15 that can help, particularly in what's being perceived, and I know you know it better than me, but as more of a role player draft, that
Yeah.
they'll find a functional player there, probably to replace Caleb Martin, and then we'll have this same conversation again. Do they trade that guy as soon as they pick him? And we'll be going to summer league, and we'll be like, don't get too comfortable with the Heat, and then he'll end up being here once training camp starts. So that's I know where this is headed this summer.
That's Ethan Skolnick. Thank you for joining. We'll be back on the channel with more very soon. Be sure to subscribe and subscribe to 5 on the Floor and also Off the Floor on Discord.
Yep.
Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you, Brian.